When you hear the name Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of questions come to mind. How could one of the most connected men in America, a guy with presidents, princes, and billionaires in his network, also be running one of the biggest sex trafficking rings in recent history? And then, what do you make of the fact that he dies in a maximum security prison right before he's about to talk? This is the story of Jeffrey Epstein for sure, but it's really about something much bigger, the system that let it all happen for decades. So that's really the first question we have to tackle. How does a guy like this operate for decades? I mean, this isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about the entire environment that let him get away with it year after year, right under the noses of some of the most powerful people on the planet. How does an operation like that last for so long? And that brings us to the second, and honestly, the more disturbing question. When the police finally caught up to him and they had a mountain of evidence, how did the justice system, the very system that's supposed to protect people, fail so spectacularly? See, this goes way beyond just one corrupt person. This is about the failure of entire institutions. All right, so to really get a handle on the system, we kind of have to start with the man himself. Jeffrey Epstein's life, well, it was just full of contradictions. He starts out in a middle-class family in Brooklyn, right? But somehow he ends up moving in these elite global power circles like he was born into it, all while being incredibly secretive. I mean, his rise to the top was just bizarre. He drops out of college, but at just 20 years old, he lands a teaching job at the super elite Dalton School. This gave him direct access to the kids of New York's richest families. And that connection, well, that was his ticket to Wall Street. He climbs the ladder at Bear Stearns fast and then starts his own firm, a really mysterious one, where he claimed he only managed money for billionaires. And here's the kicker. To this day, nobody really knows where all that money actually came from. By the 90s, there was no denying he was incredibly rich, and you could see it in his properties. We're talking a massive Manhattan mansion, a waterfront estate in Palm Beach, his own private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a huge ranch out in New Mexico, and of course, a private jet. But here's the thing you have to understand. This wasn't just about showing off his wealth. This was the actual infrastructure for his crimes. These places were tools for power and for isolating his victims. Okay, so this is where we get to the really disturbing heart of the story. Because behind all that wealth and all those powerful friends was a carefully built system of sexual exploitation. And what investigators found was a method that was just chillingly consistent and brutally effective. It was basically a pyramid scheme of abuse. It would start with something as simple as offering a young girl a couple $100 for a massage. Once she was lured to one of his mansions and abused, she would then be pressured, either with threats or more money, to recruit her own friends and classmates. This is what's so insidious. It turned victims into recruiters, which grew his network like wildfire and put a protective layer between him and the initial crime. And by 2005, the police in Palm Beach had put together a rock-solid case. I mean, they had identified more than 40 victims. Many were minors, and they were ready to testify. By every account, the evidence was just overwhelming. So they handed it all over to federal prosecutors, fully expecting some serious charges to be laid. But what happened next is still one of the most controversial and, frankly, baffling legal moves in modern history. Instead of facing the full power of the federal justice system, Epstein and his team of expensive lawyers managed to get a deal that was just unbelievable, and it completely denied justice to his victims. Look, let's be absolutely clear about how strong this case was. The investigators had put in the work. They had dozens of victims, all telling similar stories that backed each other up. A federal indictment, probably a life sentence. It seemed like a slam dunk. But he never faced those federal charges. Instead, behind closed doors, his lawyers cut a secret deal, a non-prosecution agreement with a U.S. attorney, a guy named Alexander Acosta. This deal completely protected Epstein and anyone involved with him from all federal charges. In return, he pleaded guilty to a couple of minor state charges, he served just 13 months in a county jail, and get this, he was on work release, which meant he could leave the jail for 12 hours a day. It wasn't long before people started calling it the sweetheart deal of the century. And for good reason. Not only did he get a ridiculously light sentence, but the deal also gave immunity to any of his potential co-conspirators. And maybe worst of all, the victims were never even told about it. A court later said that was a violation of their rights. For more than 10 years, it really looked like Epstein had used his money and connections to just get away with it all. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close. thanks to a decade of hard work from journalists and victim advocates, the case came roaring back. And this time, it led to a second arrest, that mysterious death in jail, and finally, the unsealing of documents that a lot of powerful people really did not want the public to see. So here's a quick rundown. In July of 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested him again on sex trafficking charges, and they made it clear, no deal this time. But about a month later, he's found dead in his cell. The spotlight then turns to his main partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, and she's convicted in 2021. All of this led up to early 2024, when a judge finally ordered those long-hidden court files to be unsealed. So what are these files? Well, they came from a defamation lawsuit that one of the victims, Virginia Giuffre, filed against Ghislaine Maxwell way back in 2015. We're talking over 900 pages of depositions, flight logs, and some pretty explosive allegations. For the first time, all of us were getting a raw, unfiltered look inside Epstein's world and the powerful people who were a part of it. Okay, now this is incredibly important. Before we go any further, we have to be crystal clear about something. Just because someone's name is in these documents does not mean they did anything wrong. It's not proof of guilt. A lot of people were mentioned just in passing or as associates or because they flew on his plane one time. So we're only going to talk about the context that's actually in the documents. No speculation. What the documents did confirm was just how wide-ranging his network was. It was like a who's who of global power, which is what gave him this veneer of legitimacy. For example, Prince Andrew was named in allegations by Virginia Giuffre. He's always denied them, but he did end up settling a civil lawsuit with her. Former President Bill Clinton's name shows up a lot in the flight logs, but there are no accusations of wrongdoing against him in the files. Donald Trump is mentioned because of past associations, and Bill Gates was noted as having met with Epstein several times, even after his 2008 conviction. So if you look past the shocking headlines and the big names, what the Epstein case really is a lesson. A lesson in how power, influence, and systemic failure work. The real story here isn't just about what one man did, it's about how an entire system allowed him to do it for so long.
And the lessons are pretty stark when you lay them out. First, it shows that extreme wealth can apparently buy you a totally different, much friendlier version of the justice system. Second, you see how these powerful networks protect their own. I mean, Epstein was a registered sex offender, and he was still welcomed back into elite circles. Third, it's clear the victims, who often came from tough backgrounds, faced this huge uphill battle just to be heard, let alone believed. And finally, just about every institution that was supposed to stop something like this from happening, from the prosecutors to the prison system, failed.
And all of this really boils down to one central, unresolved idea: accountability. Sure, Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. But what about the powerful network that made it all possible? For the most part, that network is still intact, and it's still unpunished. So now the files are out there. We know the names, we can see the pattern of how the institutions failed, but the biggest question of all still hangs in the air. Will there ever be full accountability? Not just for Epstein, but for the entire powerful system that protected him. If you think this kind of analysis is important, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Metalog. Our goal is to keep breaking down the complex systems that shape our world. Thanks for joining us.